He had every advantage, wealth, tutors, and opportunity, but still failed every test. Frustration piled up, parents worried, and classmates whispered. Late nights of studying changed nothing. Yet, quietly, a janitor watched, holding a simple secret that could change everything. What happened next would shock everyone and completely transform his life. He had everything anyone could imagine: money, a sprawling home filled with every luxury, access to the best tutors, the finest schools, and yet every test he took ended the same way: failure. The numbers on the page blurred as he stared at them, formulas and facts slipping through his mind no matter how many times he reviewed them. Late at night, the quiet of his study room offered no comfort. He pounded his fists on the desk, frustrated, wondering how someone with everything could still be incapable of the simplest academic tasks. Tutoring sessions only seemed to remind him of his inadequacy. Each correction, each sigh of his teacher, each impatient glance left him sinking deeper into self-doubt. At school, the laughter of classmates followed him like shadows. The casual whispers, the smirks exchanged over his shoulder, made him feel smaller with every passing day, as though his failures defined him far more than his privileges ever could. He felt trapped in a cycle he could not escape, a golden cage built of wealth and opportunity that seemed to amplify his shortcomings rather than conceal them. His parents, though supportive in their own ways, showed worry etched on their faces every time another test score arrived, their eyes reflecting a mixture of confusion, concern, and disappointment that pressed heavier on his chest than any academic challenge ever could. He tried to explain, tried to focus, but the harder he worked, the more elusive the answers became. No amount of tutoring or late-night study sessions bridged the gap between effort and success. He began to question himself, his worth, and whether he was simply incapable, destined to be the failure that everyone feared. Even the smallest mistakes loomed like mountains, and each exam became a reminder of how far he was from the person he wanted to be, from the image of success that others assumed would come naturally. Yet, amidst the whirlwind of his academic misery, something unusual caught his attention, something he had never noticed before. A janitor moved quietly through the halls, sweeping floors and dusting corners, going about his work with calm precision. Unlike the hurried students and frantic teachers, he seemed unaffected by the chaos of the school, gliding through the corridors almost unnoticed, yet always present. There was a rhythm to his movements, a deliberate patience that suggested he observed more than he cleaned, that his presence carried a kind of quiet wisdom hidden beneath the mundane task of tending the building. It was strange, almost incongruous, that someone so ordinary could seem so composed, so aware, while the young man struggled to keep his own life in order. He caught the janitor's eye once, briefly, and felt a flicker of something unexplainable, a sense that this man, of all people, understood something important, something he himself had been missing. The moment was fleeting, yet it lingered in his mind, a tiny spark of curiosity in the midst of overwhelming despair. For the first time in weeks, he wondered not about formulas or memorization, but about the person who had quietly watched him, from the edges of the classroom, who seemed to see through the failures and the frustrations, who carried an air of patience and insight that he could not yet comprehend. It was a small moment, almost imperceptible, yet it planted a seed in his mind, a question that would not leave him alone. Why did this janitor seem different? Why did he not judge? Why did he not laugh or sigh with impatience like everyone else? For the first time, a glimmer of hope appeared, faint and fragile yet persistent, suggesting that maybe, just maybe, help could come from the most unexpected place. And so, surrounded by luxury yet drowning in failure, the young man found himself looking not at his textbooks or tutors, but at a quiet figure sweeping the floors, wondering if this unassuming janitor held a key to something more, something that could change everything about the way he saw himself. His struggles, and the future he had once believed was slipping forever from his grasp. As the days passed, the young man continued to stumble through his studies, each failure deepening the weight on his shoulders. Yet, in the quiet corners of the school, the janitor continued his silent observation, moving with deliberate calm, noticing details that escaped everyone else. He watched the frustration in the young man's eyes, the trembling hands as he tried to write equations correctly, the furrowed brow during reading assignments, the hopeless shaking of the head when answers refused to come. There was no judgment. In his gaze, only an unspoken awareness, as though he had seen struggles like this before, not in a privileged school, but in life itself. One afternoon, while the young man slumped over a pile of textbooks in the library, the janitor approached, leaning lightly on his broom, his voice soft yet confident, offering a simple observation that caught the boy off guard. At first, the young man barely registered him, brushing off the comment with a nervous laugh, unsure why he was speaking, wondering if this man even noticed his repeated failures. But the janitor was persistent, not in a commanding or overbearing way, but in quiet nudges, small remarks that seemed almost casual, questions about how he approached a problem, comments about focus, reminders to breathe and think clearly. Gradually, the boy began to notice the wisdom hidden in those ordinary words, hints of guidance that seemed simple at first, but slowly carried weight. One day, the janitor paused while cleaning near the classroom window and told a story about a river, about how water could carve rock not by force but by patience, persistence, and direction. At first, the young man listened and smiled awkwardly, thinking it was just a story about nature, but as days went by, the metaphor began to settle in his mind. Another time, the janitor suggested organizing thoughts in a notebook in a particular way, a tiny habit that seemed trivial, yet it started to reveal patterns and connections the boy had never noticed. There was no grand lecture, no complicated formula, just short, steady lessons delivered in quiet, almost imperceptible moments. Slowly, the young man began to see his studies differently. Problems no longer appeared as insurmountable walls, but as puzzles with patterns, as challenges to be understood one step at a time. He started paying attention to details, noticing connections, learning to approach questions with patience rather than panic. The janitor's presence became a quiet anchor, a reminder that struggle did not mean failure, that persistence and perspective could make the impossible attainable. And somewhere along the way, a single secret was hinted at, carefully veiled in analogy and practice, a principle so simple yet so powerful that it could change everything if he embraced it. The janitor never demanded attention, never pushed harshly. Instead, he let the lessons sink in slowly, giving the young man space to think, to experiment, to fail, and try again. Each small success, each tiny breakthrough, built confidence, proving that the janitor's words were not empty. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone else, but for the boy, the change began inside, a shift in perception, a spark of understanding that felt like a light turning on in a dark room. He started to notice patterns in his textbooks, strategies, in his notes, ways to approach questions he had overlooked for years. The transformation was gradual, quiet, almost magical in its simplicity, and yet it carried enormous power. Suspense built naturally as the narrator observes the boy's growing curiosity, his eagerness to apply the small insights, his anticipation of the larger lesson that seemed just out of reach. The janitor remained patient, knowing that the moment to reveal the life-changing secret would arrive when the boy was ready, and in the meantime, every small interaction, every casual remark, every story shared near a broom or a classroom corner became part of the foundation of a new mindset. And as the young man leaned over his books one evening, finally seeing connections where before there was only confusion, he realized something extraordinary. Help could come from the most unexpected place, and wisdom was not always found in expensive tutors or textbooks, but in quiet observation, in stories, and in a single secret waiting patiently to be discovered. The seed had been planted, the pattern emerging, and soon, Everything was about to change in a way he had never imagined. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the young man began to change. The lessons the janitor had shared, simple as they seemed, started to take root in his mind, guiding the way he approached problems. Where once he had rushed, panicked, and given up, he now paused, observed, and thought through each question. Concepts that had seemed confusing or impossible now began to make sense, like puzzle pieces finally falling into place. Small successes followed quickly, and each one built upon the last. He solved problems with a clarity he had never known, completed assignments with methodical care, and, for the first time, understood the power of focus and persistence. Teachers noticed the difference almost immediately, their surprised glances, conveying both curiosity and respect. Peers who had whispered behind his back now paused, some with disbelief, some with quiet admiration, as he tackled challenges with a newfound composure. Even in social interactions, he grew more confident, no longer overshadowed by anxiety or self-doubt, speaking with assurance, listening with attention, and acting with calm purpose. The secret the janitor had shared was not a magic formula, but a mindset, a way of seeing, thinking, and applying effort in a structured, consistent way. Slowly, resilience grew where frustration once festered, self-discipline replaced panic, and determination replaced fear. He discovered the rhythm in studying, the patterns in logic, and the strategies hidden in repetition. He began to anticipate questions before they appeared, prepare answers before they were required, and approach obstacles not as threats but as challenges to be solved. Every test became an opportunity rather than a threat. Every project, a chance to apply what he had learned. Every small victory reinforced his confidence, and gradually the whispers of classmates turned into acknowledgement. The concerned glances of teachers shifted to nods of approval. The janitor continued his quiet presence, never intruding, never taking credit, simply observing with a gentle approval as the young man's transformation unfolded. There was no fanfare, no grand announcement, just steady growth, noticeable to those paying attention, undeniable in its effect. And as his understanding deepened, so did his curiosity. He began asking questions, experimenting with methods, testing theories, and learning from mistakes rather than fearing them. This self-guided growth marked the turning point. He was no longer merely responding to instruction, but thinking independently, critically, and effectively. The narrator describes the sense of empowerment building inside him, the joy of achievement after years of disappointment, and the subtle thrill of mastering something that had once seemed impossible. And yet, despite all progress, the most pivotal challenge was yet to come. The major exam, the ultimate test of everything he had learned, loomed ahead like a mountain, a final proving ground for both skill and mindset. Anticipation built with every passing day, each lesson applied, each problem solved, each pattern recognized, was preparation for that defining moment. The pressure was real, but this time it was different. The young man faced it not with panic, but with readiness, patience, and confidence rooted in the secret that had begun to reshape his approach to life itself. The narrator emphasizes the tension, the sense that everything now depended on how well he could apply what he had learned, not just in theory but in practice, under scrutiny and time pressure. And through it all, the janitor remained in the background, an unseen guide whose quiet mentorship had already altered the course of the young man's life. The moment of reckoning approached, and the young man, once overwhelmed by failure, now felt the calm power of preparation, the growing assurance that success was possible, and that the lessons of patience, observation, and persistence were more valuable than any luxury, tutor, or privilege he had ever possessed. Every heartbeat, every glance at the notes, every calculated step toward the exam was infused with the silent wisdom he had been given. And as he took a deep breath before the first question, the world seemed to shift. Suddenly, everything he had learned, Every small victory, every hidden insight was about to be tested, and for the first time, he was ready to rise. The day of the ultimate test arrived, a challenge that would measure everything the young man had learned, both in knowledge and in character. The morning air was crisp, the hallways buzzing with anticipation as students whispered, pens clicked, and papers rustled. Yet he walked with a calm resolve that was new, almost foreign to him. Hours of preparation, countless small victories, and the subtle guidance of the janitor had led to this moment, and for the first time, he felt equipped, not just with facts and formulas, but with focus, patience, and the ability to think clearly under pressure. He entered the room, notes neatly organized, mind alert, and took his seat with steady hands, breathing deliberately, letting the rhythm of preparation guide him. The first question appeared, and instinctively he approached it as he had been taught. Slow observation, breaking the problem into parts, trusting the process rather than panicking. Each answer flowed naturally, not from rote memorization, but from understanding, pattern recognition, and disciplined thought. As the test progressed, the young man felt a strange lightness, a clarity of mind that allowed him to see connections he had never noticed before, to navigate challenges that had once seemed insurmountable. His confidence was not arrogant. It was quiet, steady, a result of preparation and the internalization of the lessons that the janitor had shared so subtly. Time seemed to stretch and contract, each moment focused and precise as he tackled the exam with a balance of patience and determination. The narrator describes the tension in the room, the silent pressure of expectation, the eyes of teachers scanning, peers watching nervously, yet he remained grounded, anchored by the single secret that had reshaped his approach to everything. And then came the final questions, the ones that previously would have made him freeze, panic, and fail. This time he paused, recalled the analogies, the stories, the habits instilled by the janitor, and applied them with methodical care. Every step, every calculation, every word flowed with purpose, guided by the wisdom he had once overlooked. By the time he put down his pen, a sense of accomplishment washed over him, not the shallow pride of a fleeting victory, but the deep satisfaction of knowing he had grown, truly learned, and applied himself in a way that was entirely his own. When the results were announced, the room seemed to hold its breath. Teachers, who had once frowned at his failures, now smiled with surprise and approval. Peers looked at him differently, respect and quiet admiration replacing doubt and whispers. He had succeeded academically, but more importantly, he had succeeded in mastering himself, in developing resilience, focus, and a disciplined mindset that no one could take away. Gratitude welled within him, not just for the success itself, but for the guidance he had received, for the unseen mentor who had quietly shaped the course of his life. He looked around for the janitor, and there he was, sweeping calmly in the corner, nodding subtly, his eyes reflecting quiet pride without. A word spoken. No applause, no recognition, just a simple acknowledgement that the secret had done its work. The narrator emphasizes the lesson. Wisdom can come from the most unexpected sources, from those we might overlook, from quiet corners of the world where patience and experience wait to be shared. Privilege alone does not guarantee success. Guidance, observation, discipline, and the willingness to listen often matter far more. And as the young man left the exam room, a sense of humility and self-respect settled over him. He understood that his failures had been necessary steps, that struggle had prepared him for growth, and that the lessons of patience, focus, and persistence would guide him far beyond any classroom. The janitor, having fulfilled his quiet role, walked away, leaving a lasting impact that required no recognition, no applause, just the satisfaction of knowing a life had been changed. The narrator closes with reflection. A single secret, shared at the right time, had altered the course of a young man's life, teaching him that success was not merely about wealth, opportunity, or privilege, but about mindset, perseverance, and the ability to see beyond immediate failure to the possibilities that lay ahead. In that moment, the young man understood something profound. The greatest lessons often arrive from the most unlikely places, and the most lasting victories are those that transform not just what we achieve, but who we become. And so, as the school day ended, the young man walked forward with confidence, curiosity, and humility, carrying the life-changing secret in his heart, a reminder that even in a world full of advantages and resources, true wisdom, patience, and guidance are priceless, and a single secret, shared at exactly the right moment, could indeed change a life forever.